So if you have the Bible app, why don't you download the Bible app if you don't, and go to John chapter 9. We're going to be in kind of John chapter 8, 9, and 10. Welcome again to those of you at mochurch.tv. So I've been sharing throughout this series that I have this nerd notebook that's pretty new to me, so I've been filling it out over the last quarter or so. And in here I put things that put me in awe of God, or things that are apologetics type stuff, which means a defense of the faith. And so there's things in here from philosophy, or just things about nature or the planets or space. But then there's also quotes and philosophical arguments and that kind of thing. And so one of the things I want to share that I wrote in here is from a guy, the late Huston Smith, who was a scholar of religious studies and really world-renowned for his study of religions. And he wrote a book called The World's Religions several decades ago now that actually was kind of a staple in college classrooms for religion. And so I want to read kind of what he says, and I'll get to a direct quote from him also. But Huston Smith, he talks about the idea, he talks about how in the history of the world, you think about all the influential people that you might say, man, that person had a lot of influence. You know, people like Socrates or Napoleon or whoever. Like, man, they had a lot of influence. He says, in the history of the world, there have only been two prominent and influential figures whose lives were so incredible, so tremendous. The data of their lives was so inexplicable that the people around them did not just ask, who are you, but what are you? You know, these two people, he says, were Buddha and Jesus. Now, one direct quote from that basically textbook was this: how many people have provoked this question? Not who are you with respect to name, origin, or ancestry, but what are you? What order of being do you belong to? What species do you represent? Not Caesar, certainly, not Napoleon, or even Socrates. Only two, he says, Jesus and Buddha. And then he goes on to kind of point out that in both cases, people wanted to worship those two individuals. They wanted to worship them. I mean, they looked at them and they saw so much compassion and integrity and beauty and wisdom that they wanted to worship those two guys. So the responses of those two people were completely opposed, though. Total opposite of one another. Buddha said, do not worship me. You do not worship me. Like, absolutely don't worship me. I am not a god. He continually said, don't look to me, look to my dharma, which is my doctrine, my teaching. Look to my dharma. But Jesus, unequivocally, he accepted worship. And he didn't just say, I'm a god. He said, I am the God. Completely opposite responses between Buddha and Jesus. Now, kind of aside from that argument, kind of drawing a line there and saying that's Huston Smith's observations in religion. When you think, on the other hand, about all the people who have claimed to be deity, like throughout history, and even in modern times, some of us can remember people who made the news who claimed to be deity, and they got everybody to drink the Kool-Aid or everybody to commit mass suicide because a comet was coming. I mean, weird stuff like that. You know, you think of all the people who claim to be deity, and I wrote in my book just that they've been unable to convince anyone except for a group of marginalized, off-balance, ragtag little group of disenfranchised people that they actually are God. But they would say, I am God, worship me. And so out of that group of people who claim to be deity, they couldn't get people to actually follow them except for, you know, a small amount, except for one guy. One guy. So there is a man in both categories, and I've kind of put this picture in my nerd notebook. There's a person in both categories. The only overlap is this one person who lived an incredible life of influence. Of all the people who have lived, and you could get down to who do you think are the top 10 most influential men and women throughout history or whatever, he's going to be, if you're an honest person, he's going to be high on that list. So one of the most influential people in history. And on the other side, people who claim to be divine, and people actually believed them. And there's only one person that is in both of those circles in the overlap, and that is Jesus. And so I wrote down in here, if potentially the most influential person in the history of the world claimed to be God himself, there's no thoughtful person who can possibly just walk away from that without at least studying it honestly? Okay, so that's where it kind of brings us, is just this idea of, man, Jesus, who is this guy? Like, who are you, Jesus? Scratch that. What are you? Of what species are you? That you stand out among others in history. Who are you? What are you? Now, the life and teachings and deeds of Jesus, they were always making people come up with theories about who he was or what he was. It's constant in Scripture. And you see it a lot in specifically John chapters 8, 9, and 10. But it's like if you ever watched the series Lost, everybody's always coming up with theories. Like, this is purgatory. This is this. Everybody had theories. And that's kind of what Jesus' life and teachings and deeds did. And you see several theories in John chapters 8 through 10. In John chapter 8, some Jews in the crowd where Jesus is teaching, they answer him and they're saying, hey, are we right in saying that you're a Samaritan? Which was like, in their derogatory terms, a half-breed Jew. A Jew, that was half Jewish and half Gentile. So the Jews hated the Samaritans, and the Samaritans, we hate you back. And so they're like, hey, are you a Samaritan? Or are you demon-possessed? Like theories about Jesus. Then in John chapter 9, which is a major story, Jesus' disciple John, who wrote the Gospel of John, he records that Jesus healed a man who had been blind since birth. And people start forming theories about Jesus because this guy identifies Jesus as the one who healed him. And in verse 16, some theorize he's a sinner. Verse 17, no, he's got to be a prophet. And in verse 38, this guy, you think about the, Prince, the man formerly known as blind. We'll call him that. Okay, thinking of Prince. The man formerly known as blind, he worships Jesus. And here's the deal. Jesus took it. Jesus accepted it. What does that say about Jesus? So he's a sinner. He's a prophet. This person clearly believes that Jesus is deity and he's worthy of worship. Think about that. So what are you, Jesus? Like, what species are you that you allow people to worship? You don't rebuke them. You don't correct them. You allow them to worship. And then in John chapter 10, the next chapter, to hear some more of the theories about Jesus, he says, I am the good shepherd. I'm going to lay down my life for the sheep. And at the end of this, it says, the Jews in the crowd were again divided. Many of them said, he is demon-possessed and he's raving mad. This guy is a taco short of a combo meal. I mean, are you kidding me? So there are all kinds of theories. But others said, these are not the sayings of a man possessed by a demon. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind? Jesus, who are you? What are you? And so to kind of go into one more, if you fast forward in the Gospel of John to John chapter 20, brought this up a few weeks ago, doubting Thomas eventually calls Jesus Lord and God, and Jesus doesn't correct him. He, on the other hand, actually, honestly, he commends him for believing in him. Who are you, Jesus? What are you? Now, it's pretty typical that if you were to talk to a friend or a family member, any random person on the street, somebody at your work, if you talk to them about Jesus and what their theories are on Jesus, typically to be polite, if people aren't, submitting to Jesus like, man, he was God in the flesh, like this defines me and history. Typically, the thing they'll say to try to be polite and to kind of dodge the issue is, of course, that he was a good moral teacher, one of the best humans to ever walk the earth. But that's a very unresearched position. Typically, that is the position of someone who hasn't gotten elbow deep in the Gospels, in the evidence of Jesus and what he claimed, because really, Jesus tried to claim more authoritative territory than that. He tried to claim more jurisdiction than just being a stand-up guy who had some good teachings, like more weight, more clout, more sway than that. In fact, if you think about some of the things, if you begin to read through the Gospels, or if you have, just think about some of the things he claimed. He claimed to have the authority to forgive sin. Just wrestle with what that means. He claimed to have that authority. Like he claimed and he acted as if he were the person who was chiefly offended by all offenses. As if all sins were against him and that he had the ability to just simply say, for instance, in Mark chapter 2 to a disabled man, son, your sins are forgiven. What does that imply about the person speaking these words? Think about that. Like, do you understand the ramifications of him looking at a person saying, your sins are forgiven? Like, that would be like you telling me, Jason Peterson, our MC who was up here a little bit ago, cheated you out of $500 in fantasy football last year, and me saying, settle down, settle down, settle down. It's not a big deal. I forgive him. That doesn't make any sense. I forgive him for what he did to you. It's acting as if I have the power to forgive because all of these things are actually sins against me. They're offenses toward me. Like, that's not natural. So wrestle with what is he saying when he tells people, I forgive you. In John chapter 8, Jesus was teaching a crowd of Jewish people, and he basically said to them, hey, your father Abraham, the father of the Jews, who lived hundreds of years ago in this context, he rejoiced at even the thought of seeing my day. In fact, he saw it and was glad. And the crowd says back to Jesus, like, dude, you're not even, that's in the Greek, dude, you're not even 50 years old. You're not even 50. Like, you've seen Abraham. Can you imagine them getting all riled up about this? You're standing in front of us talking about what Abraham wanted. You're not even 50 years old. And catch this, Jesus says in reply, before Abraham was born, I am. He is claiming right here to be the eternal, self-sustaining one. If you need to research that a little bit more, go look at Exodus chapter 3, specifically 14, where God in the burning bush says to Moses, I'm going to tell you my name. My name is I am. The great I am. And that's where we get the name Jehovah or Yahweh. And so Jesus is standing before them saying, I don't have a beginning. And they're looking at him like, what? You're talking about conversations or knowing the thoughts of Abraham? Before Abraham even was. You see the awkwardness even of the grammar, even in the English. Before Abraham was, I am. Because he's underscoring, and the Jews knew what he was saying. In fact, Jesus also told the religious people in that time, he said, I am sending you prophets and sages and teachers. Some of them you will kill and crucify. Others you will flog in your synagogues and pursue from town to town. Do you catch what Jesus just slipped in there? Anybody see? He says, I am sending you prophets and wise. I have been sending you for hundreds of years prophets and wise men. Who are, what are you? You are claiming to be the one who is the source of hundreds of years of prophets? Man, you guys just can't get it through your thick skulls. I am sending you prophets and wise men. I keep on doing this. Who are you? What are you? No wonder they wanted to kill him. Because what he's saying, if he isn't God in the flesh, is blasphemy. No wonder they want to kill him. They don't want to just kill him because he's skipping around telling people, love your neighbor. They want to kill him because it's so obvious what he is claiming. Another one that's just funny is Mark chapter 2, Matthew chapter 9. Really funny. He says, hey guys, while I'm here, nobody has to fast. Hey, while I'm present, we're just going to suspend that idea of praying and fasting while I'm here. What are you saying? Does this make sense? Jesus constantly was dropping these gems and the Jews knew exactly what he was claiming. They knew exactly. He claimed that he has always existed. He claimed to have the authority to forgive sins. He said that he would come back to judge the world at the end of time. What is Jesus saying? Who are you, Jesus? What are you? Of what species are you to be making these claims? Now, I think it's really interesting, two groups of people. When you think about like all those people in that circle that claim to be deity, and then you got influential people, and here's Jesus. It's really interesting to me, two of the groups of people that he convinced that he was God. One of them is that you have to understand the last people on the face of the earth to believe or worship that a man was God would be first century Jews. Like if you get into the study and you look at, religions in the East, not so much a big deal. Religions in the West, thinking of like the Romans and the Greeks, they had gods that became human or came down and made whoopee with people and things like that. You know what I'm talking about? So that wasn't a big deal for them. Like, no, that's not a big deal. But I'm telling you, the Jews had this picture of a transcendent God that was just unparalleled, unmatched in any place in the world at that time. It was a God who was above the world and who had created the world, who was infinite, who was beginningless. And they respected God so much they didn't even say his name. They wouldn't say Yahweh, Jehovah. Instead of saying the kingdom of God, they'd say the kingdom of heaven, just to avoid saying it, that kind of thing. And so they had been taught in the first 2 commandments out of the 10 commandments for hundreds of years, never, ever, ever worship anything created. Not a calf, not a sun, the moon, and definitely not a person. Don't worship created things. The last people on the face of the earth who could possibly believe that a human being could be God was a first century Jew. But here we are in the first century with people saying, my Lord, my God, healed of blindness, worshiping him accepting it. And you see this going on into, even a couple weeks ago, I read a quote from Pliny the Younger, writing to an emperor saying, these Christians, they worship to sing hymns to Christ as a god. Stuff in the 2nd century, that was written in 112 AD. And so you see people that are Jewish worshiping this man as God. And the Jews were the last people you expect to do that. The other group of people I think is interesting that he convinced that he was deity are people close to him. Think about that. The people that were close to him worshipped him as God. Like even a little caveat of like his half-brother James, after the resurrection, I'm assuming becomes a follower of Jesus. Like, can you imagine ever believing someone in your family was God in the flesh, who you grew up and you're giving noogies to each other and that kind of thing or whatever? You're like, I'm not going to fall. You whatever already. You're God. But James begins worshiping Jesus, God, but also just the other people that were around him all the time, his closest disciples, some of his disciples that weren't just the 12, they believed that he's deity. Like, think about if you were going to start putting out claims that you're God. Like, think about how, giggle about that for a moment. Like, think about the people close around you. Like, hypothetically, if you were to try to convince people that you're God, the last people on earth that are likely to believe that you're God are the people who spend time with you. Okay? You might get a couple of weirdos on the internet that might private message you about your deep wisdom, but the people around you, like the people you live with that know what you're like when your guard is down, the people that work with you who know what you're like when you're under pressure, the people who travel with you and they know what you're like when you're tired, the people who camp out with you when you're hanging around, cutting up and acting a fool, like those people around you are never going to believe you're God. But here's something Jesus said. This has stood out to me for years. He said one time publicly, can any of you prove me guilty of sin? Cricket, cricket. Can any of you, think about that. Think about that challenge to publicly state, can any of you prove me guilty of sin? And here are like his 12 dudes, because he's rolling 13 deep at least everywhere he goes. 12 dudes over here off to the side, like, I know, it's crazy. This is part of what's convinced me. We were with him for 3 months, nothing. 6, 7 months, nothing. Like, this is crazy. They're sitting around. Think about, he's camping out with these dudes all the time, and he never once engaged in locker room talk with the boys. Really think about that. He never once gossiped to them or to some of them about some of the others. Like, I know, I can't stand, his breath is worse than the average dude's breath. Like, he never did that, He never lost his temper with one of them and just went off. He never said, oh, that's what she said joke around the campfire. Really legit, think about that. Like, he never engaged in that kind of stuff with these disciples who were clearly flawed, and we see it all the time. He never engaged in that. So there have been all kinds of great heroes in the world that, people that, like, after a while, like, everybody loves this guy. He's so incredible. Like, man, he leads Apple. He does this, he does that. People go crazy. Oh, this guy, or whatever. But then eventually come out the reports. He's actually a jerk. You use the kindest words I can use. That guy's actually a jerk. Or other reports come out, people who lived with him, worked around him, traveled with him. Someone gets a book contract, right? That's all it takes. Someone gets an interview with a journalist, and then it starts coming out. What was this dude really like? What was she really like? Most of the people who said they were God, they never had any impact. Why? Because somebody always sees the truth around them, the cruelty, the selfishness, the duplicity, the hypocrisy. And they're like, man, this dude, he used his influence and had a harem. There's teenage girls in his harem, things like that. And nothing ever came out about Jesus like that. Can anyone here prove me guilty of any sin? In fact, a really huge reference to this, I think, is Luke chapter 8, where it says Jesus traveled around from one town and village to another. The 12 were with him. There were his main disciples, and also some women. Just think about that. Mary, called Magdalene, starts naming names, Joanna, Susanna, and many others. These are female disciples. These women were helping to support them out of their own means. They're entrepreneurial. Now think about that. Wait, there were female disciples? Absolutely. He had his 12 main disciples, but there were many disciples outside of those 12. And so women traveled around with him at times, sounds like decently regularly, and there was no abuse of power. I mean, just start going through the stories right now. Weinstein. I mean, just go through. There was no abuse. There was no manipulation for selfish purposes. There were no propositions. There was no sex scandal. There was no, request of sexual favors. There's not even an accusation of that. He stands publicly and says, who can accuse me or prove that I'm guilty of sin? These women were obviously honored and respected and contributed to the mission of Jesus. This is unbelievable evidence to me. He had female disciples, and he says, can any of you prove me guilty of sin? Who are you, Jesus? What are you? Of what species are you? His Jewish disciples, male and female, believed he was the God-man. Think about that. In his book, Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis has a famous passage, if you know anything about C.S. Lewis or apologetics, defenses of the Christian faith. He has this passage that's come to be known as the Trilemma. You've had a dilemma before of like, Wendy's or Taco Bell. That's a dilemma. That's two options. But then you throw in Burger King. That's a trilemma. Like, oh man, trying to figure this out. It's a trilemma. So trying to figure out, there's three options. And this is what he says. Like, man, I remember reading this years ago, and it's just such a powerful passage. He says this, C.S. Lewis, from agnostic to Christian, says this: I am trying here to prevent anyone saying that really foolish thing that people often say about him. I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on the level of a man saying he's a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. He says, you must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool, you can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God like Thomas did. But let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to. Now it seems to me obvious that he was neither a lunatic nor a fiend. And consequently, however strange or terrifying or unlikely it may seem, I have to accept the view that he was and is God. So there's three options. There are no other options. You can't say he's a good man. He walked around telling people to give up their lives for him. So there's three options. I know you can't read this. I didn't intend for you to. I just want to show you. I wrote this out in my nerd notebook. It's just kind of a tree of what do you do? Like, here are Jesus' claims to be God, and either they're false or they're true. And if they're false, there's two options there, creating a trilemma. Either his claims are false and he knew his claims were false, and that would be a deliberate misrepresentation. That would make him a liar, a hypocrite, a demon, if he taught and said the things he said and he was lying. And therefore also a fool because he died for a lie. But then the other option is if his claims were false, maybe he didn't know his claims were false. And in that case, he was sincerely deluded, which makes him a lunatic. He was just loopy. So his claims are false, and there's two options for why they were false. But on the other side, there's the option, the third option, that his claims were true. And if so, then he is Lord, God in the flesh, Emmanuel, God with us. The answer to what are you is God in the flesh. And then you have two alternatives. You can accept him or reject him. That's the breakdown of the trilemma. And so you look at that, and really, the trilemma in C.S. Lewis's days really kind of become four. I don't know the word for that, the four-lemma, okay? But there's four now. Today, there's a newer theory in the span of 2,000 years, is that he's liar, lunatic, Lord, or legend. And a couple weeks ago, we talked about in the topic of Scripture, we pointed out historical references outside of the Bible that Jesus lived. He is certainly not that is an unresearched position. In fact, as far as my understanding of reading, that theory never even popped up until the late 18th century, in the late 1700s. Up until that point, people just asked, who is Jesus? Is he the Son of God, and did he rise from the dead? It wasn't until that point that people actually started coming up with the poppycock that he never even existed. He wasn't even a historical person. And so he can't be a legend. There's historical references by people who hated him and that mark his influence in history and all that stuff. And he can't be a good moral teacher. He's not just a stand-up guy if this is the stuff he was saying and teaching. Those options are out. The only options that remain are he's a deceiver, or he was delusional, or he is God and Lord. So you have to ask yourself, was he a liar? Like, was he a deceiver or demon-possessed? You put that in the same, really, category. Why would he die for a known lie? You know, what would he have to gain by doing that? And even if you were to conclude he's a liar, you still got to wrestle with the evidence, the historical evidence that he performed miracles and that he rose from the dead. You have to figure out, how does that fit in with the liar theory? Because there's historical evidence of that stuff. And then, or he was a lunatic. Like, do the sayings and the behavior of his seem like those of a lunatic? Yeah, like, his teachings are full of wisdom and shrewdness and realism. They're fresh. They're, to the highest degree, they're a product of a sane mind, but you need to wrestle through. Is it possible that Jesus was a lunatic? In fact, in that vein, there's this quote by G.K. Chesterton, who was a little bit older than C.S. Lewis, and some of his works influenced C.S. Lewis. One of his books, The Everlasting Man, C.S. Lewis, I think, puts number 2 on the list of the works that influenced him toward becoming a follower of Jesus and wrestling through Jesus. And so this writer, Christian philosopher, brilliant intellectual, English writer, just for fun, Google him. I think pictures of G.K. Chesterton are hysterical. He's really witty, sharp tongue, and I think his picture just fits perfectly his personality. He just kind of looks fun, smart, and wacky, okay? And so G.K. Chesterton, he writes this. I call this passage the key. But G.K. Chesterton says this. He says, if I found a key on the road and discovered it fit and opened a particular lock at my house, I would assume most likely that the key was made by the lockmaker who created the locks in my home. If I found a key on the street, I'd be like, hey, that's funny. Okay, I found that this connects. This key was made by the lockmakers. He says, and if I find a set of teachings set out in pre-modern Oriental society that has proven itself of such universal validity that it has fascinated and satisfied millions of people in every century, including the best minds in history and the simplest hearts, that it has made itself at home in virtually every culture and inspired masterpieces of beauty in every field of art, continues to grow rapidly and spread and assert itself in lands where a century ago the name of Jesus Christ was not even heard. If such teachings so obviously fit the locks of so many human souls in so many times and so many places, are they likely to be the works of a deceiver or of a fool? In fact, it is more likely that they were designed by the heart maker. These teachings, he says, they have fit in every culture and every time They satisfy the needs of the human heart. They resonate with so many people, from intellectual to the simple-hearted. What makes more sense? Deceiver or fool said these things? Or is this, what are you? The creator of the human heart. The one who speaks the words, that knows what you need to hear and what you need to know and why you were made. It's his teachings. Is this a deceiver or a lunatic? His teaching, read the accounts. Have you read the accounts? You try to come up with a better line. Like what Jesus said, it's like these parables, these paradoxes, all these things. Like, do you realize what kind of person would have had to have written this to have made it up even? Like if someone just made this, do you imagine what kind of person it would have to have been to have made it up? P.T. Forsyth said this. He said, if God is not like Christ, then he is less than the God we crave and less than the God that the world needs. That's the kind of person that we're looking at. So even as I describe him, even as you see him in the Gospels, can you begin to feel a little bit of what the disciples and the crowds around him saw, whether it was fear or anger or worship? Like those three responses, can you see a little, or the reason why some got down and worshiped him, can you see that when you read the Gospels? His followers knew they were looking through human flesh at the very being of God. And they heard the things that he said, and they put this all together, and the last people in the world that would have done that would have been first century Jews. And so they look through this human flesh and they say, who are you? What are you? The magnitude of Jesus' claim, when you go back to those two bubbles, the magnitude of Jesus' claim and the extent of his impact mean that you better not just doubt that he is God, you better be certain that he is not God because of the magnitude of his claims, okay? Like imagine, for instance, you receive a letter, and it looks like it's on very official letterhead, and it's from one of the major law firms in Cleveland. And, we're not talking Disneyland here. We're talking like for real, okay? So you get this letterhead, and it says, please come see us. You're the long-lost heir of the British throne. And you're like, come on, we live in the days of spam. This number that's unknown, ignore. I'm smart. I'm not an idiot. I'm ignoring this number. I don't have new friends. They would be in my phone if they, So you're like, ignore stuff like that. But you're like, oh, come on, really? I'm a long-lost heir of the British. Come on. Like, I'm Chinese, whatever it is. You're like, come on, really? I'm not British. Look at me, whatever it is. Like it can't be. But you're not even going to make a phone call. It's because of the magnitude of the claim. Like, okay, I don't have anything to lose by just simply making a phone call because I know who I'm calling. It's this specific firm. I can look it up on Google. I'm not going to click a link or something. I'm going to call them myself. Or say, another example, say you get official stationery from the IRS, and it looks really official. And it says, you owe $400,000 in back taxes. And you're like, what? I ain't made $40,000. You know what I mean? Like, come on, really? And yet, the magnitude of the claim. The magnitude of this claim is you better not just doubt that it's true. You better be certain that it's not true. Because if there's a chance it's true and you miss it, it ruins your life. It's the magnitude of the claim. Jesus said, I am the way and the truth and the life, and no one comes to the Father, no one, but through me. That is a bold claim. And so you better know that that's not true. Like, I don't think everyone has to go study the life of David Koresh. Waco, Texas, Google it, kids. Like, you don't have to study that because there's not much influence or evidence to back up his claims. But when you've got a guy that's one of the most influential in history, who claims to be deity and people actually follow him, this one central figure, there's one person who made these claims and had this impact, and you're not going to pick up the phone? You're not going to investigate the data of Jesus? There's no thoughtful person who can possibly walk away from that without studying it. Let me read one more thing from C.S. Lewis. This whole series, I don't think I've quoted C.S. Lewis twice. I've reserved it to this sermon, okay? I've really tried to restrain myself because you all know I'm a geek if you know me, like C.S. Lewis, or what. But this is from a famous essay called The Man or Rabbit. And the link is being sent out in our weekly email today at noon. And so this is a famous essay where he discusses, and it's short, but the whole essay is coming out, you can read it. It's very short. But he discusses the person who would ask the question, can you lead a good life without believing in Christianity? And C.S. Lewis, in his way, man, it's so many points he makes in this, but I'm going to really abbreviate it. He says, what this person is really asking is, aren't good intentions enough to keep me safe and blameless without knocking on that dreadful door and making sure that there is or isn't someone inside? He says it this way, this man asking this question is shirking. He is deliberately trying not to know whether Christianity is true or false, because he foresees endless trouble if it should turn out to be true. He is like the man who deliberately forgets to look at the notice board, because if he did, he might find his name down for some unpleasant duty. He's like the man who won't look at his bank account because he's afraid of what he might find there. He's like the man who won't go to the doctor when he feels a mysterious pain because he's afraid of what the doctor might tell him. To evade the Son of Man, Jesus, to look the other way, to pretend you haven't noticed, to become suddenly absorbed in something on the other side of the street, to leave the receiver off the telephone because it might be he who is calling, to leave unopened certain letters in a strange handwriting because they might be from him. You may not be certain whether or not you ought to be a Christian, but you do know that you ought to be a man, not an ostrich hiding its head in the sand. He says this, here is a door behind which, according to some people, the secret of the universe is waiting for you. Either that's true or it isn't. And if it isn't, then what the door really conceals is simply the greatest fraud, the most colossal sell on record. Isn't it obvious that the job of every man is to find out which, and then to devote his full energies either to serving this tremendous secret or exposing and destroying this gigantic humbug? Faced with such an issue, can you really remain wholly absorbed in your own blessed moral development? He's saying, behind this door is Jesus. And either what he says is true or it isn't, but you have to open the door and actually take head on the question, who are you, Jesus? Or what are you? You've got to wrestle with that question. It's the magnitude of the claims. And while you are searching for Jesus, the good news is he's also pursuing you. Revelation 3:20 says this, Jesus said, here I am, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with that person and they with me. Let's pray.